I love that it's forgotten lore because it both is and isn't, both in his time and in ours. Now, there have been way too many synopsises and examinations of the text of The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, so I don't know if this will say anything particularly new, but they'll follow my archaeological bent and more mythological bent. So let's follow the Raven through the chamber door. My name is Renee. You're listening to Detours in Archaeology, and this is the Mythic breakdown of The Raven. The Raven was written in 1844 and published in 1845 by Edgar Allan Poe. The story within a story, as the narrator is telling the story, takes place in the dead of winter, a bleak December, which has been theorized to have been a connection to the end of the year based on the use of midnight in the first verse and December in the second verse. Both midnight and December symbolize the end of something, as well as the anticipation of something new, a change that's gonna happen. According to Swedish computer scientist and writer Kristoffer Hallqvist, the midnight referred to in December could be New Year's Eve, a date most of us connect with change, which also seems to be what Victor Rydberg believes when he is translating The Raven to Swedish, since he uses the phrase "Art sista not var in," the last night of the year has arrived. Though I suppose it matches with kind of a Christmas ghost story, much in the vein of A Christmas Carol that was published 2 years earlier in 1843 over in England by Charles Dickens. This is back when the season had a much stronger connection to the liminal spaces in a time of year when the veil between worlds is thin, and following in these footsteps in the present day, The Nightmare Before Christmas. It was a common tradition to tell ghost stories in the 1800s and before, but we have a lot of recorded ones in the Victorian era, when the tradition was shared with America, particularly New England, where Poe was writing. The Raven was published in January 1845 to instant success in the New York Evening Mirror. I don't know why I ever actually thought this, but The Lost Lenore wasn't based on Poe's child bride, Virginia Eliza Clem, or Poe, who was 13 years old when she got married to her 27-year-old first cousin. Bleh. But it wasn't based on her because she hadn't died yet. Eliza actually died of tuberculosis 2 years after The Raven was published in 1847. And 2 years after that, Poe, unfortunately, died mysteriously. Found out in the world. I slightly wonder, highly doubt the truth of it though, if this poem was about his mother, who passed when Edgar was only 2. It is commonly believed that she died of tuberculosis at the age of 24. Actually, just like Edgar's wife. Same age, same disease, same names, sort of. His mother was called Eliza for Elizabeth, and Virginia's middle name was Eliza. Coincidence? Probably. But it's still weird though. He could have just been writing about death in general. It obviously wasn't uncommon. But his mother's death was thought to have inspired a lot of Poe's writing about lost women. But the loss of a loved one was something that an audience could connect with. Or maybe he had a first love that either broke his heart or died. So either option was the nameless evermore that the angels named Lenore. Plus, Lenore rhymes with evermore, so it works in poetry. Now, getting into the story, the specific mention of the purple curtains at the window could be an illusion of the royal color, especially in Greece and Rome, the same place where much of the quote-unquote forgotten lore that Poe uses comes from. It may not be particularly meaningful, but they do set the stage for the rest of the nameless narrator's tale. The dive into Greek and Roman mythology was actually pretty prevalent at the time. It was still relatively recently after the Renaissance when the classics were all brought back into the zeitgeist. They were studied and enjoyed for all the inspiration that they could muster. After a time of rapping and tapping at the chamber door, the narrator finally opens it and, to darkness, whispers Lenore. The whisper is clearly a wish that a ghost was really there, but upon the echo answering, the narrator goes into full denial. Merely an echo, merely this, and nothing more. The lattice is a design in walls, fences, garden trellises, and in this case, windows, that would mean specific things for and based on the community where they were built. For more examples, see the 3-part episode series on lattice work in various cultures around the world and what they're used for. I'll have links to those episodes in the description. In Greece and Rome, the lattice pattern was connected to the mythological brothers Castor and Pollux, who would move from the living world to the underworld and back, and their sister Helen of Sparta. You may have heard her as Helen of Troy. The myth of the Dioskuros, which translates to sons of Zeus and includes a goddess in between. To summarize the myth from which arose the Dakana in Hesiod's Ziogas, the mortals Castor and Pollux, aka Polydeuces, were the twin sons of the Spartan queen Leda and Zeus disguised as a swan, and raised with Leda's husband Tyndareus. During their life, they accompanied the heroes of Jason's Argonauts, joined in the Caledonian boar hunt, rescued their kidnapped sister Hellene after destroying Athens, raped their cousins, another set of twin brothers, Licinius and Idas of Messenia's betrothed, the Leocypides, the daughters of the White Horse, Phoebe and Hilaira, and as their last act, shared the fate of a grave in the valley of Therapnae. They had a complex story. The twins died before Helena was kidnapped years later by Paris and taken to Troy, so they didn't participate in the Trojan War. When Castor fell in battle, Polydeuces got revenge and then was killed by Ida, who Zeus then struck with a lightning bolt before making Polydeuces a god. Because of the brothers' connection of love and friendship, Polydeuces refuses to rise if his brother stays dead. Zeus acquiesced and brought Castor up as well, giving them access to both the mortals and the gods on alternating days. The connection between the siblings became a backdrop and a witness for contracts that the other gods would preside over to make sure the swearers were telling the truth and would keep their oaths, which is something that the character wants after the echo repeated, almost confirming, at least in his hopeful mind, that the voice was Lenore. Interestingly, the narrator gendered the raven as he. It's kind of weird, especially if he wanted it to be Lenore, but it's not like he could really tell what gender the bird was just by looking at it, unless Poe is saying that the narrator was an experienced ornithologist. The line of the saintly days of yore makes me think of Hamlet, especially when ravens are so often seen as perched on a skull, and Yorick was that famous skull that Hamlet was monologuing over. Lattices were important for making oaths and contracts while in their presence as the gods were watching. This shows up in mythology with their sister Hellene as the third pillar as a subject between them, providing the connection. Alternately, because the twins' visages often appear flanking roads or votive offering shrines for travelers or guests, the twin motif provides its connection, which was deeply ingrained in the society of the time. But most importantly to the lattice point, the Spartan and iconic representation of the Tai Dai or the Dioskurai was the two upright posts joined by a crossbar called the Dokana, meaning beam figure. In Laconia, the region of southern Greece in which Sparta ruled, their prodigal daughter and sometimes goddess Helen or Helene has been pictured in reliefs from before the 2nd century BCE as a stiff xoanon, or wooden image. On the Laconian cup from 550 BCE shows a lattice between two snake-entwined pillars, one of which is depicted as behind another lattice. The Dokana relief moved from the Laconia Spartan lotus flower to the Greek world through the lattice design, with the belief that between the vertical pillars, Hellene watches as a oath goddess along with her brothers. This connection is derived from her epithet Ramusian in nearby Attica, where Athens lies. where she is typically depicted with a torch or wicker basket because of their presence in underground repositories and treasuries. The raven didn't seem to have any respect in the character's room and flew around the chamber, and it sat on the bust of Pallas. Pallas refers to Pallas Athena, with the name Pallas being an epithet, and there are several myths explaining the connection, most notably that she accidentally killed her childhood friend Pallas, a nymph that she used to train with, and adopted her name out of grief. Alternatively, Pallas was a giant whom Athena defeated, or it was a warrior she vanquished to earn the name. The name itself is associated with wisdom, strategy, and warfare, so Pallas Athena represents the goddess's prowess and strategic power. For a little bit more on the explanations for the epithet Pallas, include the friendship with the nymph Pallas, the daughter of Triton, who was raised with Athena. During a sparring session, a childhood war game, with Zeus watching them, never trust him, Athena, trying to dodge Pallas, accidentally impaled her friend with a spear, killing her. In her grief, Athena created a wooden statue of her friend known as the Palladium, which she later honored and used as a protective artifact. She wrapped the Aegis, a cloak that she feared, around the statue and placed it beside the statue of Zeus, honoring her lost friend. The Palladium became a sacred object later kept in the city of Troy to protect it. That obviously didn't work very well. Also, that would be weird because Athena was against Troy, because she sided with Odysseus and he was Greek. Another explanation of the epithet was the defeat of the giant Pallas, and in this myth, Athena slew a giant named Pallas during the Gigantomachy, a war between the giants and the gods. She then flayed him and used his skin as a shield or war cloak. Or Athena fought and defeated Pallas the Titan, who was associated with war, for whom she supposedly made the Aegis breastplate from his skin for her armor, and either way, she later added the head of Medusa. Pallas may also derive from the Greek word paulo, meaning to brandish a spear. In this sense, Pallas Athena can be interpreted as Athena who brandishes a spear, a title that fits her role as a warrior goddess. Otherwise, the name Athena, who is also known for her craftsmanship, is combined with the epithet meaning youth or young woman. The combined name symbolizes wisdom, particularly feminine wisdom, independence, strategic warfare, and defensive arts. A little aside, the Vienna Secession art movement adopted Pallas Athena as a symbol because they saw themselves in a state of war with traditional European art. They used intelligence to gain the upper hand. The representation of wisdom, reason, and scholarship has been exhaustively discussed, and the titular raven landing on the bust symbolizes the descent of despair over reason and sanity, where the bust stands for the rational mind and the attempt to use logic to understand what is happening. Because the raven never leaves the bust, the argument has been made that the narrator's mind is permanently taken over by the irrationality of grief, crushing his ability to think logically. However, in the majority of cultures around the world, the raven is believed to be a wise character, sometimes a trickster, sometimes a hero to mankind, often a messenger between the world and the afterlife, but always a representation of knowledge, likely because of Raven's actual intelligence. While Athena's animal symbol was actually the owl, and Apollo's was the raven or crow, translations vary, the raven still matches well with the symbolism and the myths of Athena. Moving forward with the story, the bird was described as shorn and shaven, so probably disheveled, though the narrator mentions that it was no craven, meaning that it wasn't a coward. So it wasn't disheveled out of fear, just messy. Maybe it traveled a long way. The nice Plutonian shore refers to the Roman underworld, which is ruled by the god Pluto, known as Hades in Hades to the ancient Greeks. In the mythology, the deceased must cross over the river Styx and Acheron, the river of woe, which was first to be crossed, by the ferryman Charon. The soul had to pay Charon a coin, typically an obol or Persian denarius, which had to be placed in the mouth of the deceased before burial. While neither coin was particularly valuable, it meant that the deceased had been given proper funeral rites. The consequences of not paying were that the souls would be denied passage, and they were cursed to wander the riverbanks for 100 years. Don't know what would happen after that. But those were only 2 of the 5 rivers around the underworld. The others were the Citations, the river of lamentation or wails that flows through Tartarus, which is the bad part of the underworld, by the way. The Phlegethon, the river of fire or the flaming river, which was described by Plato as a stream of fire that coils around the earth and flows into the depths of Tartarus. In some myths, it is said that the river literally flows with fire and is associated with punishment for the wicked or the eternal torment of those who committed violence. While in other versions, the river can instead burn away a person's sins by drinking it or being dunked in, especially if the person was truly remorseful. In Dante's Inferno, it is a river of boiling blood that punishes violent offenders with the depth of their submersion determined by the severity of their crime. The final river is Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, where souls drink to forget their past lives before being reborn. According to the Achilleid, written by the Roman poetess Statius in the 1st century CE, when Achilles was born, his mother Thetis tried to make him immortal by dipping him in the river Styx. However, he was left vulnerable at the part of his body by which she held him, his left heel. So, Paris was able to kill Achilles during the Trojan War by shooting an arrow into his heel. Although, that again, up for speculation depending on which myth you read. Because if you compare it with Hyginus's Fabulae, that says that Achilles' heel was said to be vulnerable, but made no mention of being dipped in the river Styx. Maybe it just happened to be where he was hit by Paris, and so that's where he bled out. The goddess Styx, like her father Oceanus and his sons, the river gods, was also a river. According to Hesiod, Styx was given 1/10 of her father's water, which flowed far underground until it came up to the surface to pour out from a high rock. The river Styx makes another connection to oath-making and keeping, as it was not only the main river that souls had to cross to reach the underworld, but it was also known as the river of unbreakable oaths by which the gods swear. This is because the goddess Styx helped Zeus during the Titanomachy and thus became a goddess of oaths. The gods swore their most sacred oaths by her waters, and violating such an oath would result in severe punishment. I suppose that any of the shores that lead to the underworld would work, because Poe is not specific, as the narrator is calling the bird a messenger from Pluto's underworld in the general sense. Moving forward, when the raven responds, either the raven said its name was Nevermore, as the narrator assumes, or it's just saying no. Or maybe that if it's from the Night's Plutonian shore, maybe all the names there are Nevermore because they are nevermore said due to the drink or dip into the river Lethe. Thus, no one has names anymore. And in the text, the narrator says, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. But how would he know what is relevant to his question? He doesn't know what happens after death, especially since, presumably, the narrator would have been an intellectual Christian, as he is distinguishing everything in terms of the classics, then straight to God, which seem to give him a more solid connection to the world around him, at least until now. Obviously, I can't actually dig into the mind and motives of a fictional character or even the mind of Poe, so I'm not sure what they're thinking, and especially wondering why the character would feel blessed by having a bird or beast perched on a sculptured bust above his chamber door, whether or not it had the name of Nevermore. As the narrator is getting sick of the bird's presence, he says that the bird was taught what word to say by some unhappy master. who is most likely dead. Hence the dirges after the unmerciful disaster, a force that continuously followed the master. The stock and store was basically an insult at the supposed canned response that had no meaning. At first, the narrator is trying to understand the raven but can't deal with the bird's irrational answers. The narrator is frustrated because he is constantly anthropomorphizing the raven and reading a human intent into everything it does, which leads him to feel hurt when it kind of acts human, and then angry when it continues to do chill bird behavior. Even though he's still angry, if the bird leaves in the morning, he knows he'll be in a deeper state of despair because he'll be abandoned once again. Though it's the same canned response, the narrator's mood still substantially lightens as if the narrator thinks the bird could say anything else. The narrator moves his chair closer to the door to delve deeper into what the raven's intentions were and the specific meaning of nevermore. It, of course, gave no responses, and the air seems to grow heavy in the still silence. The narrator could imagine that an invisible seraphim, an angel of the highest order in some mythologies, is carrying around a censer. The etymology of the word seraphim, according to Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, was that it came from the word meaning those who kindle or make hot. They are often depicted in Christian artworks as humans with 3 sets of bird-like wings facing different directions. But using the original etymological source, further descriptions say that the all-fire seraphim are dispelling and destroying the shadows of darkness. Of course, this may be literal fire, or as Thomas Aquinas wrote in the Summa Theologiae, it's the properties of fire that Pseudo-Dionysius was talking about. That because those angels are born with an inflexibility towards God, they, like fire, are always going up. Second, that the heat itself is a penetrating action, rousing and cleansing them by their heat. And third, that the angels have inextinguishable light or brightness and clarity, so they would enlighten others. The seraphim would also appear in Jewish and Islamic texts, but as Poe was raised in a Christian-run country, and not being either other religion himself, while he may have read some of the other religious texts, he probably wouldn't be as familiar with them, or pictured the seraphim in the other forms, such as their zoomorphic forms with the head of either a bull, an eagle, a lion, or a human, with the more common having 6 wings, like in Christian mythology, but 4 faces, as they can be depicted in Islamic texts, or in Jewish texts, as they fit more in the middle to top of the angel hierarchy and are constantly burning up before reforming in their proper place because they got too close to God. They have also been depicted as flying asps, snakes, with human characteristics in a Judean seal from the 8th century BCE. The swinging censers were to bless and cleanse the space, as they still do either before or during Catholic Mass. And that has the same purpose as when people do and have done with sage and other incense for millennia. The phrase tinkled over the tufted floor is kind of funny to me. I guess it makes sense because they don't have to walk at all because they have wings, and if they are tinkling over the tough floor, they're choosing to use both just to be extra. The narrator claims that the raven was sent by God with the angels in his mind. To be fair, the raven is most likely in his mind as well. It's been there forever and it doesn't eat or poop once. He begs them all, the angels and the bird, that he could be rid of his memories of his lost Lenore. The Nepenthe is another classical allusion. It alludes to Homer's Odyssey. Figuratively, it means that which chases away sorrow, and literally means not sorrow or anti-sorrow. In classic Greek mythology, Nepenthe was used as an epithet for Apollo, which also connects to ravens as they were one of the sacred animals, like I mentioned earlier. Nepenthe was also a drug said to be from Egypt that was used by Helen of Troy, Sparta, a callback to the lattice design and making oaths, while she was being held captive in Troy. She grabbed the drug she received from Balidamon, wife of Egyptian Thon, and threw it into the wine that her once and present husband Menelaus and Odysseus' son Telemachus were drinking. This wasn't done out of malice. She wanted them to forget the pain of losing their lifelong friend and father, respectively, before regaling them with the story of when Odie snuck into Troy and saved her by killing heaps of Trojans, hoping that the angels will give him such a drug, as the narrator is desperate to forget his heartbreak, as the rest of the story also conveys. When the raven continues to reply in the negative, the narrator gets pissed and speaks multiple verses, or rather shouts multiple verses at the bird, calling it a devil, asking whether it was indeed sent by God, by Satan the tempter, or if a huge storm, a tempest, washed it ashore. The next question he asks is if there is balm in Gilead. Gilead is a mountainous region east of the Jordan River in northern Jordan, where a famous medicinal balm or perfume was made from the Commiphora gileadensis, a plant. It's referenced in the Old Testament, and it is really actually still sold and still used to reduce skin irritations, relieve muscle and joint pain, and comfort respiratory issues. In the Hebrew Bible, it also took on a metaphorical meaning, symbolizing spiritual healing for Israel and for sinners, though the phrase is now used as symbolism for a universal cure or a source of hope and healing, which might be partially because of this poem. It could also allude to the peace treaty that Jacob and his father-in-law Laban reached at the location which led to the name Gilead, which in itself meant heap or cairn of witnesses. So the narrator is either pleading for spiritual healing, for peace, for an ease of pain, or it's an embodiment of the raven itself as his witness. And it's another peace treaty, which means there was some deal made, connecting again to the lattice in the window. In the next stanza, the narrator, still desperate for an answer, of course, asks the raven if he and Lenore will ever be reunited in paradise, as the name Aden is the Arabic and biblical name for Eden, as in the Garden of, hoping that the afterlife will give him some respite. But the only word spoken still is and will always be nevermore. Of course, by the end, the narrator is sick of the bird and wants it to return from the storm that carried it, or the underworld as its messenger, leaving the Statue of Wisdom after imparting none. Poe actually claims in 1850 the phrase "from out my heart" is used in combination with the answer "nevermore" to let the narrator realize that he should not try to seek a moral in what has been previously narrated. But it won't end, the raven won't leave, and the shadow that the raven casts over the room envelops the narrator into his own darkness and sorrow, forevermore. Of course, ravens themselves are generally ill omens in our modern culture, but they're still so pretty. But where did that come from? In Norse mythology, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory respectively, were Odin's ravens. Although I wonder if that's the type of lore that Poe meant when he wrote Saintly Days of Yore. Hence the thinking of Hamlet, Denmark, Vikings. It could work. The collective name for ravens is varied. It's a conspiracy, a treachery, a rave, or a constable. And none are particularly good in the context that they were spoken, but the most common was an unkindness. Now, a constable was different because it was about the ravens who had kept watch over the Tower of London. And there was a law that said they could never be killed because bad things happen when they died. So they decided to make it a rule. Now, a rave today isn't so bad. It's a big dance party. But going back in time, it was more of a dangerous kind of noun. The unkindness could have stemmed from the 19th century belief that ravens would expel their young from their nests long before they were ready, which is actually not scientifically valid at all. But the earliest reference for an unkindness as a noun was between 1150 and 1500, with the earliest actual written account from 1390 by William Langland in Middle English. So it might not have been connected, but it could have traced forward a bit. As I said before, it wasn't only Europeans that knew that ravens were wise or intelligent. Raven was also seen as a guide, a messenger between the spirit world and the physical world that can provide clarity and wisdom. Therefore, they are also commonly called upon by shamans for clarity in rituals, as they can be trained, and there is a connection to death and fate, as they are seen as a harbinger of important news related to the end of a journey. But that doesn't always mean death. Especially in indigenous mythology, ravens had the ability to shapeshift, symbolizing change, adaptability, and metamorphosis. The bird was always a symbol of wisdom, magic, clairvoyance, and holding secrets, kind of like prophecies that would have to be believed, and they were also a balance between good and evil, as the stories prove within the different mythologies, and that there is wisdom even in darkness. Some examples from the indigenous cultures was that Raven was portrayed as a trickster, but also a creator, who of course does play pranks, but brought light to the world, like in some Alaska Native tribes. One of the tribal stories from the Tlingits tells a story about Raven saving the light. It tells of a time when the world was dark, and the great trickster, Raven, stole the sun, moon, and the stars from a greedy chief. Seeing that the world was dark, Raven flew all around trying to find the light. He finds a greedy chief with a series of chests that he did not want to open. Raven realized that the light was trapped in the series of cedar chests that he is hoarding. Raven becomes very tiny and then flies down to the daughter of the chief and is swallowed by her, making her pregnant. Raven is then born as a human child and convinces the chief by crying to let him play with the boxes. Each time that the chief passes him a box, he opens it, the first box releasing the stars, the second box releasing the moon, and after a lot of crying, he tricks the chief into opening the last box containing the sun, which he then snatches in his beak after turning back into a raven. Raven escapes through a smoke hole with the sun, and all the stars and the moon are already in the sky. But the soot from the firehouse coats his feathers, turning him from a white bird to the black one he is today. While this specific version is rooted in the Tlingit tradition, similar tales of Raven and the creation of light exist among other Northwest cultures. He also brought fire to humans in the Navajo or Dene culture, just like Prometheus did in his story, although a bit different, of course. Raven used to have white feathers. One day, when he saw that humans were suffering, he took a stick, or maybe a bundle of sticks, flew up to the sun, took some of its fire, and flew back down and presented it to humanity, helping them. Raven, or could have been crow, spent so long in the hot flames that the ash coated their feathers and turned them black. And that's why ravens and crows were black. But in Greece, instead of being scorched by the sun by accident, The white raven had brought bad news to Apollo that his lover Coronis, the princess, was unfaithful. He was so mad after that he told his sister Artemis to kill it, the raven, as a messenger, and a bunch of others, which she did. I guess Apollo kind of felt bad, but was still angry because he brought the raven back, but turned its feathers black with his fire. He shot the messenger, which was the raven, or crow in some translations. Apollo is also the god of prophecy, a common aspect of raven symbology. Birds were sacrificed to Athena in connection to Coronis, Apollo's ex-lover, and she would later become the constellation Corvus, which means the crow. And it's never stated outright which species of bird they are actually referring to. In addition, mythology about the raven is also found in Celtic, Welsh, and Irish mythologies, and even Arthurian legend, where some believed Arthur transformed into a raven after death. And of course, those are only two examples of the myriad of cultures in America, and most of them have stories about raven or crow. But in Norse culture, ravens were also associated with death and wars, since as carrion birds, they would fly over the battlefield, picking out the dead. But they were also often used in navigation, which is the way that the Vikings found Iceland, according to Landnámabók, the Book of Settlements. According to the book, the legend says that the explorer Floki Vilgedarsson used 3 ravens while searching for land as he sailed. He would release them from the ship, and if they returned, he'd know that there was no land around. But once, around 870 CE, he released them. One flew back to the Faroe Islands from whence he came, one circled the ship and returned, and the third flew northwest. Upon following the bird, they reached that island that is now called Iceland. After seeing a fjord full of ice, and didn't really explore the land that much, they named the land Iceland. And that's where his nickname of Hrafna Floki, or Raven Floki, came from. And in the Old Testament, the raven is the first bird that Noah actually released to look for land. So apparently, the raven never came back. So it probably found land and just decided, nope, I'm done with that. It wasn't until its second or third bird that it actually came back with a sprig of green. And apparently, ravens provided for Elijah and was used as a symbol for God's prominence in the New Testament and in Christian artwork. But it also shows up wherever ravens do, including among nations across Africa and all over Asia. The only area where ravens aren't a common figure is in South America, probably because there are no species of raven or crow in that part of the world. And a bit more connected to Poe's genealogy, as his family was from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, pretty much everywhere in the UK. They have the Celtic mythology. Bran is the word for raven and is a giant Celtic deity who was part of the Mabinogion, a collection of medieval Welsh tales, as crowned king over this island, i.e. Britain. Because of his stature, he and his court lived in a tent, as no house was ever built large enough to contain him. The part of his myth that is more connected to ravens and their purpose in mythology is his severed head. The Celts worshipped the human head and believed it to be where the soul was, capable of independent life after the death of the body, which kind of connects to Norse mythology with the head of Mimir, who Odin preserved the head of so he could give him prophecies. But that's obviously a little bit different. But they thought that the Bran head possessed powers of prophecy and was symbolic of fertility. They also believed that one of the things it was good for was providing entertainment in the other world. According to the myth, Bran had been mortally wounded and requested for his companions to cut off his head. He instructed them to take the head with them in their wanderings, telling them that it would not only provide them with entertainment and companionship, but would also remain uncorrupted as long as they refrained from opening a certain forbidden door. If that door was opened, they would find themselves back in the real world and would remember all of their sorrows. Eventually, they were to take the head and bury it on the White Mount in London, and all of this happened as Bronn had prophesied, and his companions passed 80 joyous years together. The head was purportedly buried in London, where it kept away all invaders from Britain until it was finally unearthed. But the raven in Celtic mythology symbolized protection, wisdom, prophecy, and magic, and was associated with Bronn, because his name is Raven, literally, Bronn the Blessed, and the war goddess the Morrigan. The Morrigan. The Morrigan is often depicted in the form of the raven flying over the battlefields, also sort of like Viking mythology, deciding who lives and who dies. Now, of course, I didn't make this connection right away, but when I was searching for Bronn and Raven, Bronn the King of Game of Thrones came up, and his name is a complete spoiler as to what he's going to be doing, because that's Bronn is using the three-eyed raven to move when he can't walk anymore, but also he can see into the past and predict the future. Prophecy. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Detours in Archaeology, the mythic breakdown of the Raven. I hope that you learned a lot. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe to the podcast, to the YouTube channel, to my website itself. Leave a 5-star review, please, and leave a comment. I highly recommend going to the website and looking at all the pictures that go along with this article, all the artifacts, all the places. There are links in the description. That would extremely help me, and you can follow along with what I do. You can follow my Instagram, my Blue Sky account, and my Patreon, which is free. And you do get extra little bonus things. I have bloopers on the drawing weeks as I mess up a lot during these recordings. I'm sorry for all of my pronunciation, names, and just words in general. I tried. Thank you for your patience. If you know of any corrections, or you have more information, or any questions, feel free to email me directly at detoursinarchaeology@gmail.com, or you can contact me really anywhere. And I have some merch in my website store. I have a shirt that says, "Id est quod illa dixit." It means that's what she said in Latin. I also have stickers, just small random things. I am on the Archaeology Podcast Network, so if you are new and listening to this for the first time, welcome. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it if you've listened to all of my episodes already. I have received some emails from people giving me different ideas about different things to do in the future. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And I would very much like to write about some of the things that were talked about. Let me know if you want your name attributed when I do it. Otherwise, it can be anonymous. All the music is from Scott Buckley and can be found at his website at scottbuckley.com.au. So, for the fun fact, I'm going to share a few false superstitions that you can look for when you're enjoying your crisp autumn days. 1, that catching a falling leaf is good luck, or that you can make a wish on it. The superstition can get more complex depending on the color and type of leaf you catch. A red leaf, or maple leaves in general, could mean good luck in love. An orange leaf could mean inner transformation, or ginkgo leaves symbolize enlightenment as well as hope and resilience. How long does it last? Well, depends on who you're talking to. It could be a week or a month or the whole season. But after you catch it, you can throw it back into the wind or bring it inside. Doesn't really make a difference either way. And as Thanksgiving is approaching, we all know that breaking wishbones would give the person who gets a bigger piece a wish. But in general, the piece called a forcula the forked bone that supports birds in flight, or the wishbone, is broken so the person who breaks off the bigger piece can make a wish or enjoy good luck, depending on the version. The practice goes back to medieval England, where meals celebrating St. Martin's Day, known as Martinmas, which was traditionally an end of winter feast day commemorating the 4th century St. Martin of Tours. But their version included geese because turkeys evolved in America, so they wouldn't have access to them yet. Of course, we all know that we carve jack-o'-lanterns on Halloween because of traditions in Samhain, but of course they used turnips or gourds back then, not pumpkins. And I talk way more about this whole tradition in my Jack of the Lanterns episode that came out last Halloween. I'll also have a link to that in the description. Something I did not know was that it was believed that bobbing for apples would tell your romantic future. Of course, especially after COVID, it is not much of a staple as it used to be, too many germs, but it used to be a tradition where women secretly marked apples before their potential partners went a bobbin, and future matches were foretold depending on whose apple ended up in whose mouth. In another practice, women were the ones doing the bobbing, so if they managed to get an apple in one bite, it indicated true love, with the prognosis getting a little bit worse with each subsequent try. In a more complex tradition, the women who would bite an apple first would be the first to get married. Another is something that I have seen in stores, but I never knew the folklore about it: cinnamon brooms. I have learned before that part of the witchy kind of energy or Wicca energy would come out when sweeping with an old broom. But apparently, cinnamon brooms, which are strips of cinnamon bark tied to a broom shape, would ward off evil. You're supposed to hang one above your front door or literally sweep your porch with it. As I said, nowadays, they are available in a lot of grocery stores and a lot of farmers markets, so you don't have to make one yourself. They do smell so good, though. The last is that onions can predict the winter weather. When the harvest season rolls around, the chilly months are coming. And that means climate divination and produce naturally fit together. Keeping an eye on your onion skins used to be a popular way to predict winter conditions, and was even in the Farmer's Almanac, which had a rhyme that told you how to read them. It went, onion skin very thin, mild winter coming in. Onion skin thick and tough, coming winter cold and rough. But really, it worked for any kind of skin. Apple skin, thick corn husk, and flowers blooming in late autumn are other indicators that a rough winter was on its way. Fowl bones, like chicken bones, were also sometimes used after their Martinmas celebrations. In the 15th century, Bavarians would let their Martinmas geese's breastbones dry out and use that to predict the weather, though it took special skills to interpret it that I'm not clear about. I'm just going to end with a little story about Edgar Allan Poe. He was first published in 1827 in Boston under the name A Bostonian, so he did do it anonymously. It was a collection of poems, and the title poem was the title for the book Timberlane and Other Poems, was inspired by the historical figure Timberlane, also known as Timur, a 14th century Central Asian Turco-Mongol conqueror who founded the Timurid Empire and is considered one of history's greatest military leaders. Only 50 copies were printed, and it wasn't really popular when he was alive, but it is one of the rarest books. It is extremely valuable, and it is estimated that only 12 still exist. But The first major story that he wrote, and one that basically established the new genre of detective fiction, was Murders in the Rue Morgue, that was published in 1841. Unfortunately, though he wrote a lot of detective stories, no one could ever find out how he actually died. He was found delirious on a Baltimore street on October 3rd, 1849, wearing clothes that did not fit, and was taken to a hospital where he remained incoherent and died 4 days later. So, no idea what really happened to him, but the official cause of death was listed as congestion of the brain, but a lot of other theories exist, including alcoholism, rabies, murder, or the practice of cooping, where he may have been forced to vote multiple times for political gangs, but no one knows. Thanks again.